They met by chance on a cold day. But what he discovered about her past would change all their lives forever. Before we dive into today's story, tell me, where are you watching from? And what's the time there right now? The wind howled like a living thing, shrieking through the empty streets as snow swirled violently in the air, coating everything in a white, unforgiving blanket. The street lamps flickered under the force of the blizzard, their dim yellow glow barely cutting through the icy haze. In the middle of the desolate sidewalk, a small figure knelt, her knees pressed into the frozen ground, her breath visible in ragged, desperate puffs. Lily Grace, barely 6 years old, clung to something smaller, tighter, closer, a tiny bundle in her arms that trembled with each gust of wind. It was Emma, her baby sister, only 2 years old, her cheeks flushed a dangerous shade of pale pink, her eyelids fluttering weakly as if sleep was calling her into a place she might never return from. Lily's own fingers were stiff and numb, her knuckles red from cold, but she wouldn't loosen her grip, not even for a second. Her thin cotton dress, once white, now clung to her like damp paper, and her tangled golden hair whipped across her tear-streaked cheeks. She bent her head, pressing her frozen lips to Emma's temple, whispering in a voice so fragile it was almost lost to the wind, "Don't cry, Emmy. I'll keep you warm." But her body betrayed her, shaking violently, teeth chattering, legs quivering under the weight of both her sister and the storm's cruelty. The snow beneath them had turned into a wet, icy nest, soaking through Lily's stockings, but she didn't move. Moving might mean losing the small patch of warmth they shared. Somewhere in the distance, tires crunched slowly over snow, and through the swirling white, a sleek black limousine emerged, headlights cutting twin paths through the storm. It rolled to a careful stop at the curb, the engine's low purr foreign and strange in this frozen wasteland. Inside, through the tinted glass, sat Alexander Reed, a man whose tailored blue suit and commanding presence normally shielded him from the world's small tragedies, until now. His piercing blue eyes locked onto the two fragile figures huddled in the snow, and for a moment he simply stared, his breath caught in his throat. The cold outside seeped into the car despite the heater's steady hum, but it wasn't the frost that made his hands shake. It was the sight of a child too young to know such suffering, holding on to an even smaller life with the kind of desperation that no child should ever carry. Without another thought, Alexander pushed open the heavy door, the rush of frozen air biting at his face, and stepped into the storm. The snow crunched under his polished shoes as he moved toward them, his heart pounding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He crouched, his shadow falling over the two girls, and his voice, usually firm and controlled, cracked with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Oh my God, what happened to you two?" Lily's head lifted slowly, her wide blue eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and hope, her lips trembling as she fought to form words. She clutched Emma tighter, as if afraid he might take her sister away, and finally her small voice broke through the wind. "Please, she's so cold. My body isn't enough to keep her warm anymore." The words stabbed into Alexander's chest like icy blades, and he felt something deep inside him shift. For a second, the snow seemed to stop falling, the noise of the storm fading under the sound of his own heartbeat. His eyes filled with tears he didn't expect, and he lowered himself further, his knees sinking into the snow, bringing him eye level with the child who looked so fragile, yet so fiercely protective. The world around them blurred into a haze of white and cold, but here in this small, desperate circle of life, his voice was barely a whisper. "Where is your mother and father?" The words slipped from Lily's lips like fragile snowflakes, soft but heavy enough to pierce through the storm. "My father's in heaven." Her voice cracked on the last word, the weight of it far too heavy for someone so small. Alexander felt the air tighten in his chest. He opened his mouth, a dozen questions colliding in his mind, but before a single one could escape, she added in a whisper so quiet he almost missed it. "And my mommy. She told us she'd come back. But she didn't. She left us here." The storm seemed to grow louder at that confession, the wind rushing around them like it wanted to carry those words away, but the meaning had already landed deep inside him. His jaw tightened, a muscle in his cheek flickering with restrained emotion. "Left you? In this storm?" he asked, his voice low and edged with disbelief. Lily didn't speak this time. She only nodded, her chin brushing against the top of Emma's head as she pulled the little girl closer, as if her arms alone could shield her from the cold that gnawed at them both. Snowflakes whipped between them, stinging Alexander's cheeks, making it harder to see the pure blue of her eyes through the white blur. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his long wool coat, the sharp chill of the wind cutting instantly into his suit, but he ignored it. He crouched lower, carefully draping the heavy coat around both girls, tucking it under their chins, sealing them into a cocoon of borrowed warmth. "You're coming with me," he said, his tone not a suggestion but a promise carved in stone. His arms slipped beneath them, one supporting Lily's slight frame, the other cradling Emma's tiny body, lifting them gently yet firmly off the frozen ground. For a brief moment, he could feel their trembling against him, the way Lily instinctively curled toward his chest, Emma's faint whimper lost in the folds of the coat. The heat from his body pressed against their icy skin, and a strange protective fury began to stir inside him. But before he could take more than 2 steps toward the waiting limousine, a sudden movement caught his eye. A shadow cutting through a wall of falling snow. A figure emerged from across the street, trudging quickly over the icy pavement. The voice that rang out was sharp and breathless. "Hey! What are you doing with my kids?" It sliced through the muffled world of the storm, freezing Alexander in mid-step. His arms instinctively tightened around the girls as his eyes narrowed, scanning the approaching woman. Her clothes were worn, her hair tangled, her breath puffing out in frantic bursts. He could feel Lily's body stiffen against him, the little girl's small fingers clutching desperately at his lapel, and a flicker of uncertainty darted through his mind. Was this really their mother, or just another twist in a night already too cruel? The woman's steps crunched fast over the snow as she closed the distance, her breath visible in the frigid air, eyes wide and urgent, cheeks drained of all color from both the cold and the tension in the moment. Her coat was threadbare, barely clinging to her shoulders, and the wind caught strands of her unkempt hair, whipping them across her face. Alexander's gaze snapped to hers, the protective grip on the girls tightening instinctively. His voice, firm and cutting through the storm, came out sharper than he intended. "You left them here?" The accusation hung between them, raw and heavy, but the woman immediately shook her head, her voice trembling as she rushed to explain. "I'm not their mother. I found them here last night, but I have no place to take them." Her words tumbled out quickly, as though she feared he might turn and walk away before hearing the truth. Alexander's eyes, still icy and unyielding, shifted to Lily, searching her face for some sign of recognition, some confirmation or denial. His tone softened, though the tension remained. "Where is she now?" Lily's gaze lowered to the bundled form of Emma, her lashes heavy with snow, her voice so faint it was almost swallowed by the wind. "I don't know. She said she'd find someone to care for us." The innocence and resignation in her words cut through him deeper than the cold ever could. The stranger, still standing just a step away, met his eyes again, this time not with defense, but with a desperate plea. "Please, they won't survive another night out here." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a brief moment, Alexander saw the truth of it, not just in her tone, but in the way Lily's small frame trembled under his coat, and in the fragile rise and fall of Emma's shallow breathing. Without another word, he adjusted his hold on the girls, turning toward the waiting limousine. The snow crunched loudly under his steps, his polished shoes already damp from the wet slush, but he didn't slow down. The door swung open, and a wave of blessed heat spilled out, wrapping around them like a promise. Inside, the plush leather seats seemed almost out of place compared to the icy misery they'd just left. As Alexander settled in, still holding the girls close, the driver glanced in the rearview mirror, surprise flickering across his face, but wisely choosing silence. He eased the door shut, sealing them away from the howl of the wind, and the world outside became a muted blur through fogged windows. The heater hummed steadily, its warmth creeping into their frozen limbs. Emma stirred faintly, a small sound escaping her lips, and Lily instinctively shifted to cradle her sister's head, her tiny hands rubbing in slow, comforting circles. Alexander could feel the tension in her frame begin to loosen, just slightly, as the warmth seeped in. The limo glided forward, tires crunching over snow-laden streets, and for a moment there was only the soft hum of the engine and the faint, rhythmic breathing of the girls. Then Lily's head, still leaning against his chest, tilted just enough for her voice to reach him, quiet but clear in the stillness. "Sir, why are you helping us?" The question, simple in words but heavy with something unspoken, sank deep into him, stirring an ache he hadn't expected. His breath caught, and for a brief moment, his gaze shifted to the blurred world outside the window. The truth was tangled, buried in years he couldn't explain in one answer. He hesitated, his lips parting, but no words came, not yet. The weight of what he couldn't say lingered between them, as warm air and unspoken truths filled the space. The limousine slid to a stop beneath the bright overhang of a private hospital, the glow from its lights spilling across the snow like a promise of safety. Before the driver could even circle around, Alexander had the door open, stepping out into the cold with both girls in his arms, his coat still wrapped tightly around them. The glass doors hissed apart at his approach, and the sudden rush of warm, sterile air struck his face, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and fresh linen. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights revealed just how pale and fragile the children were. Nurses spotted them instantly, their eyes widening at the sight, and a flurry of urgent motion followed. A doctor in a white coat jogged toward them, snapping quick orders that brought more staff running. Emma was gently lifted from Lily's lap and placed onto a rolling bed, her tiny chest barely rising and falling beneath the hospital blanket. Alexander felt a strange emptiness in his arms as she was wheeled swiftly toward an adjoining room, the glass panels revealing a team sliding her into a clear oxygen tent, warm vapor beginning to fill the space around her. Lily, still bundled in the coat, was guided to a cushioned chair near the wall, her legs dangling far above the floor, small shoes swinging nervously in the air. She kept her gaze fixed on the doorway where her sister had disappeared, her fingers twisting in the edge of the coat as if afraid to let go of anything that reminded her of safety. Alexander crossed the room slowly, the noise, sea of hurried footsteps and medical beeps fading under the sound of his own heartbeat. He lowered himself to one knee in front of her, his tailored suit brushing the polished floor, bringing his eyes level with hers. His voice softened, as though afraid any loudness might shatter her fragile calm. "Lily, do you remember your father's name?" For a moment, she simply blinked at him, her breath catching faintly before she gave the smallest nod. Her answer came without hesitation, each word pronounced with the solemn clarity of a child repeating something told many times. "My mommy said his name was Alexander. Alexander Reed." The air in the room seemed to change, the muted hum of the hospital receding into a deafening quiet. Alexander's body went rigid, his lungs suddenly tight as though the room had been drained of oxygen. His eyes searched hers for some trace of uncertainty, some chance she might be mistaken, but all he saw was sincerity and trust. Heat and cold clashed inside him in a rush of disbelief, recognition, and something deeper he couldn't name. His mouth moved before he realized he was speaking, the words barely more than breath. "That's me." The syllables hung in the sterile air like a secret accidentally spilled, their weight heavy enough to make his own pulse quicken. Somewhere in the distance, a monitor beeped steadily, but inside him, nothing felt steady at all. Alexander stood frozen, the air around him thick and heavy, as though the very weight of the past had wrapped its fingers around his throat. The sound of Lily's small, uneven breaths seemed deafening in the silence, every exhale pressing against the walls of his chest. His mind spun backward, unbidden, into a world of years past, a world where laughter had been easier, smiles had been unguarded, and love had felt like a safe place to land. He could see her in his mind, Hannah, standing under the pale light of a flickering street lamp, her hair catching in the wind, her eyes locked with his as if he were the only thing that mattered. She had been young, vibrant, and wild in a way that drew him in like a moth to a flame, and from the first moment, he knew he would risk anything to keep her. Their love had been a secret, whispered in stolen moments, hidden behind the safe facade of casual encounters. There had been long walks through quiet parks at night, her laughter echoing against the empty streets, their hands brushing until one dared to intertwine with the other. He remembered the warmth of her fingers, the way her pulse quickened when his thumb traced over her skin. But then, one day, without explanation, without goodbye, She was simply gone. He had searched with a desperation that had left him sleepless for weeks, combing through every place she might have run to, asking questions until people avoided him for fear of his hollow, fevered eyes. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, until the search itself became a shadow in his life, a wound he learned to live with but never let heal. Now, here he was, kneeling beside a little girl whose face seemed to hold fragments of a woman he had once loved more than his own breath. He studied Lily's features, the curve of her chin, the slope of her brows, and for the first time in years, his heart stumbled over itself, unsure if it was beating from shock or recognition. He felt the sting of possibilities clawing at him, dangerous thoughts he wasn't ready to name. "Lily." His voice cracked, softer than the whisper of wind. "Where's your mommy now?" The question trembled in the space between them, and for a moment he wished he could pull it back, hide from the answer that might break him. But Lily's eyes, those wide, shimmering pools, began to glisten as though a dam inside her had cracked. Her lips quivered, her small fingers tightening around his like she was holding on to something more than just his hand, maybe hope, maybe fear. "She's sick," she breathed, the words almost swallowed the air. Alexander's heart constricted, every muscle in his body tensing as if bracing for a blow. Her voice wavered again, smaller this time, each syllable like glass underfoot. "And she told me, if anything happened to her, I should find Alexander Reed." Hearing his own name spill from her trembling lips was like being struck by lightning. The sound burned through him, electrifying and terrifying all at once. His hands began to shake, a tremor he couldn't control, as her words rearranged the very foundation of his reality. Hannah. The name pulsed in his mind like a drumbeat, each repetition louder, more urgent. Could it be? Was she out there still, fighting, hurting, waiting? The edges of his vision blurred as the possibility took shape, an image of her lying somewhere in pain, alone. The air felt too thin, too sharp to breathe. He swallowed hard, trying to ground himself in the present, but the past was rushing back with ruthless speed, demanding to be acknowledged. Memories collided with the present moment, overlapping until he couldn't tell if the ache in his chest was from now or from then. He wanted to speak, to ask Lily more, but his voice had been stolen by the pounding in his ears. His eyes, however, betrayed him, glistening with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, hope laced with fear. Somewhere out there, Hannah was alive. And if she was alive, then so were the questions, the regrets, the love that had never truly died. But where was she? Why had she vanished, and why, after all this time, had she sent her daughter, their daughter, to find him? The thought was almost too much to bear, and yet it was the only thing keeping his knees from buckling beneath him. Alexander left the boardroom as if every step weighed 100 pounds, his heart hammering against his ribs, his mind consumed with one desperate thought: he had to find Hannah before it was too late. The moment he reached his car, he called his head of security, his voice sharp with urgency, ordering every private investigator on his payroll to drop their current assignments and focus solely on her. Within minutes, his phone became a lifeline of constant updates, calls, text alerts, database pings, but every lead felt like chasing smoke. He pushed through government red tape, bribed contacts in city offices, and even hacked through hospital networks with the help of his tech team, his patience thinning as the hours blurred together. He scrolled through lists of patient names, cross-checking ages and descriptions, his fingers trembling each time a name remotely resembled hers. The night sky deepened into an unforgiving black, and still he worked, his expensive suit rumpled, his tie loosened, the aura of the untouchable CEO stripped away until all that remained was a man fighting for the only woman who had ever mattered. Finally, just past midnight, a message came through. Possible match, female, mid-20s, admitted to St. Mark's Public Hospital, respiratory failure. He didn't even read the rest, he just bolted for his car, slamming the door so hard the driver flinched. The city lights streaked past in a blur as he leaned forward in the back seat, muttering prayers under his breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the headrest in front of him. The hospital came into view, a dull, aging building whose flickering sign felt like an insult to the gravity of the moment. He didn't wait for the car to stop before jumping out, his shoes striking the wet pavement with a splash. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights revealed crowded halls and peeling paint, but Alexander barely noticed. He was already at the reception desk, his tone low but deadly when he demanded to know where Hannah was. The nurse hesitated, citing privacy rules, but one look into his pleading, stormy blue eyes was enough for her to relent. She pointed down a corridor, and he strode away before she could finish her sentence. His pulse roared in his ears as he pushed open the door to room 312, the creak of the hinges unnervingly loud in the quiet ward. And there she was, Hannah, lying so still against the thin hospital mattress, her skin pale as moonlight, her hair damp and clinging to her forehead, the faint rise and fall of her chest the only proof that she was still here. For a second, he froze in the doorway, afraid that if he stepped closer, she might vanish like a dream. Slowly, he moved to her bedside, each step a battle against the lump in his throat. Her eyelids fluttered as if sensing him, and then those deep brown eyes, though dulled by illness, found him. "Alex," she whispered, her voice fragile, trembling with disbelief. It hit him harder than any corporate betrayal, harder than any loss. She was real, alive, but so heartbreakingly frail. He dropped to his knees beside her bed, his hand reaching for hers, the warmth he remembered now replaced with a coldness that scared him. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked, the question heavy with the weight of years apart. Her lips quivered, and he felt the faint squeeze of her fingers. Tears welled in her eyes before spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want to ruin your life," she murmured, pausing to catch her breath, every word costing her strength. "You had your empire, your reputation, and I didn't belong in that world anymore." He shook his head fiercely, his grip tightening around her hand as if to anchor her to him. "My life was never complete without you," he said, his voice rough but certain. "Or them." For a moment, the world seemed to still around them, just the two of them bound together by years of love, loss, and unspoken truths. But then, a sudden hitch in her breathing shattered the fragile peace. Her eyes widened, her body tensing as a violent cough racked through her frame. "Hannah?" he said sharply, panic flooding his voice. Alarms began to beep in rapid succession, the sound slicing through the room like warning bells. Within seconds, doctors and nurses burst in, their movements swift and urgent. One of them pushed Alexander back, his protests ignored as they surrounded her bed, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. He stood frozen at the foot of the bed, his heart clawing at his chest, helpless as they lowered an oxygen mask over her face. Her hand slipped from his, and in that moment, the unbearable fear took hold, that he might have found her only to lose her again. Hannah's breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest a silent battle, a fragile rhythm that seemed too delicate to trust, and Alexander felt as though every breath she took was tied to the beating of his own heart. The sterile scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint beeping of machines inside the room, creating a cruel reminder that life and death were waging war just beyond the glass. He sat outside her door on a hard bench, his arms wrapped tightly around Lily and Emma, pulling them close as though his grip could protect them from the fear clawing at all of their hearts. The hallway was dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the floor, and every passing nurse seemed to carry either hope or despair in their hurried steps. Lily tilted her small head upward, her wide eyes glistening with tears that hadn't yet fallen, the kind of tears a child tried to hold back because she thought it would make her strong. "Is Mommy going to heaven too?" she whispered, her voice trembling like a candle flame in the wind, each word a dagger to Alexander's chest. He swallowed hard, his throat tightening as memories of losing people in his past collided with the unbearable thought of losing Hannah now. "Not if I can help it," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a promise he wasn't willing to break, even if it meant tearing himself apart to keep it. He pulled Lily and Emma even closer, feeling the warmth of their tiny bodies pressed against him, the innocence of their trust cutting deeper than any wound. Time moved slowly, every minute stretching into an hour, every hour into an eternity, until the air itself felt heavy with waiting. Somewhere down the corridor, a clock ticked loudly, the sound impossibly cruel, counting down to news that could either shatter or save them. Alexander's thoughts were a storm, images of Hannah's smile, the way her laughter used to wrap around him like sunlight, the feel of her hand in his, all crashing against the reality that she was lying in that room fighting for every breath. Lily shifted in his lap, resting her head against his chest, and he realized she could probably hear how fast his heart was racing. Emma, quieter but just as scared, clung to his sleeve as if letting go would make everything worse. The faint hum of hospital machines bled through the door, each sound an anchor pulling him deeper into dread. At last, footsteps approached, measured, steady, and when Alexander looked up, the doctor was there, her white coat swaying slightly as she walked, her expression unreadable at first, which made his heart pound harder. She paused in front of them, eyes softening, and the smallest of smiles curved her lips. "She's stable," the doctor said gently, and Alexander felt the words wash over him like the first warm breeze after a long, brutal winter. His shoulders sagged, a breath escaping that he didn't even know he had been holding. But the doctor's voice carried on. "She'll need weeks to recover. Her body's been through a lot, but she's strong. She'll make it if she rests." Relief, pure, dizzying relief, flooded Alexander's face, and he let out a low laugh that was half a sob, pressing his lips to Lily's hair as he whispered, "She's going to be okay." Lily looked up at him with cautious hope, her little face searching his for truth, and Emma squeezed his arm tighter, her eyes finally showing a spark of light. In that moment, Alexander knew something inside him had shifted forever. The thought of almost losing Hannah, of almost letting these girls face the world without her, had stripped away the last of his walls. He turned to Lily, his voice firm but tender, and took her small hands in his. "From now on," he said, each word deliberate, "I'm not just someone helping you. I'm your father." His heart pounded as he spoke the truth he should have spoken long ago, his gaze locked on hers, not wavering for a second. The air seemed to still around them, the noise of the hospital fading into nothing as the weight of his words settled between them. Lily blinked, her lips parting slightly, and for a moment it looked like she couldn't breathe. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, shimmered with confusion and something else, something deeper. "You're my daddy?" she whispered, the words breaking open a silence that had lasted far too long. Spring had finally arrived, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers and the gentle warmth of sunlight that seemed to touch every leaf, every petal, and every heart in the park that day. Hannah walked slowly but with a smile that spoke of quiet healing, her fingers intertwined with Alexander's in a way that felt as if they had been meant to fit together all along, while Lily skipped ahead with Emma, the two little girls wearing matching warm dresses that swayed with each joyful step, their laughter like tiny bells ringing in the crisp morning air. The grass beneath their feet was bright green, scattered with daisies, and a soft breeze teased Hannah's hair, brushing it against her cheek. Alexander glanced at her, reading the unspoken gratitude in her eyes, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a silent promise. As they reached the park's center, the laughter of children playing in the distance mixed with the chirping of birds, creating a peaceful soundtrack that felt like the beginning of a life they had all been too afraid to dream of. He called Lily and Emma closer, kneeling so his eyes met theirs, his voice low and steady but carrying the weight of a vow he would never break as he said, "I promise. No more storms for you. No more nights of wondering if you're safe, no more days where you feel alone. Because from now on, you'll always have a home, and my arms will always be your warmth, your shelter, your place to belong." Lily didn't hesitate for even a second before throwing her small arms around his neck with such force it nearly knocked him back, and he laughed through the lump in his throat as Emma's shy giggle slipped out, the sound sweeter than any music he had ever heard. Hannah stood watching, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as her chest rose with a deep breath, her mind flashing through every hardship, every moment of uncertainty that had led to this, until the weight of relief broke her and she whispered, almost afraid the wind would carry the words away, "Thank you for finding us." Alexander turned his head toward her, meeting her gaze with one that told her he didn't just find them. He had been searching for them his whole life without even realizing it. The girls began spinning in circles, their dresses flaring like blossoms caught in a whirl of sunlight, their laughter blending with Hannah's soft chuckle as Alexander rose to his feet and pulled Hannah into his arms, holding her in the kind of embrace that said he was never letting go. The world around them seemed to fade into colors and warmth, the air thick with the scent of lilacs and the hope of new beginnings. Emma ran back to them, clutching Lily's hand, and the four of them stood together as if they were a single soul bound by love, trust, and the quiet knowledge that life had finally given them back what it had once stolen. The camera of life itself seemed to pull back, revealing them laughing under a sky so bright it felt like it had been painted just for this moment, the light catching on Hannah's hair, the glimmer in Alexander's eyes, the pure joy on Lily and Emma's faces. As the frame widened, it captured the unspoken truth that kindness can change the direction of an entire life, that it can take broken pieces and shape them into something whole, something stronger than before, and that sometimes, when we least expect it, kindness does more than heal. It brings family back together, and in that quiet, golden park, under the endless stretch of blue sky, a new chapter began for them all, one that no storm could ever erase, one that was written not in ink, but in love itself.